Today we are discussing figures of speech in poetry, which is usually full of figures of speech. So a figure of speech is saying one thing in terms of something else. For instance, literally a person might say the diner strongly expressed anger at the waiter, where figuratively, or using a figure of speech, the diner leaped from his table and roared at the waiter. At that point, the diner almost comes across as, well, he does come across as a lion, some type of an animal, which would be saying one thing in terms of something else, describing an angry diner in terms of an animal they might resemble. If we see here something like, this is a quote from Macbeth, tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow creeps in this petty pace from day to day, to the last syllable of recorded time, and all our yesterdays have lighted fools the way to dusty death. Out, out, brief candle! Life's but a walking shadow, a poor player that struts and frets his hour upon the stage, and then is heard no more. It is a tale told by an idiot, full of sound and fury, signifying nothing. Okay, we have Macbeth here, who is obviously disillusioned with life. And rather than saying, ugh, it's all pointless, we have him using these, particularly at the end, this idea of being just an actor on a stage that struts and frets that little hour, and then they're off the stage and we don't know any more about them. It's a tale told by an idiot, full of sound and fury, signifying nothing. Now, this is his very poetic, very figurative way of saying, life just doesn't mean anything to me anymore. This is after Macbeth's wife has been killed. And it just doesn't, life means nothing to him. He could say that in one sentence, or he can use this very poetic, very beautiful way of talking about the disillusionment of life in a much more figurative and provocative way. We talk about similes versus metaphors sometimes. You've probably heard both words. Similes consist of comparisons using words such as like, as, appears, seems like. So you're saying something is similar to something else. Notice the similarity in the words. So a simile is similar. A sip of Mrs. Cook's coffee is like a punch in the stomach, is similar to a punch in the stomach. Where a metaphor just says something is something. So a sip of Mrs. Cook's coffee is a punch to the stomach. So what did we see Macbeth doing? Was he saying it is, or was he saying it's like? That would tell you if he was using simile or metaphor. We have different types of metaphors. We have implied metaphors, as in he brayed his refusal to leave, implying he's a mule or a donkey. We didn't say that, but we kind of implied it because the way we talked about his actions. We have extended metaphors or controlling metaphors. In this poem, Catch by Robert Francis, two boys are, or it says it acts as if these two boys are playing ball. What we're really talking about in this poem is a poet and the reader of the poem. Two boys, uncoached, are tossing a poem together. Overhand, underhand, backhand, sleight of hand, every hand. Tossing with attitudes, latitudes, interludes, altitudes. High, make him fly off the ground for it. Low, make him stoop. Make him scoop it up. Make him as almost as possible miss it. Fast, let him sting from it. Now, fool him slowly. Everything, anything, everything, tricky, risky, nonchalant. So you see how we're talking about how a poet writes his poem and is doing things that he wants the reader to catch. Sometimes you have to really work for it. Sometimes it's easy, but you can see this is an extended metaphor, a controlling metaphor, because the entire poem is carrying this on through as the poem being a ball that the two boys are playing with. We have other figures of speech besides similes and metaphors. We have puns, a play on words that relies on a word having more than one meaning or sounding like another word, as in this instance. I was struggling to figure out how lightning works, but then it struck me. Syndiche when you use part of something to signify the whole. We do this all the time, like when we say boots on the ground. We really mean the entire soldier's there, right? But we're just talking about his boots. We say his boots. It's more poetic. It invokes more of a picture that's easy to remember. We have metonymy, where something closely associated with the subject is substituted for it, as in the crown issued a statement. What we mean is the queen issued a statement, but we always associate the queen with the crown, so therefore people know what we mean, and this form of speech is called metonymy. We have apostrophe. Now that can be a piece of punctuation, but apostrophe is also addressing someone who is absent or something non-human that cannot understand. So for instance, when Juliet is saying, Romeo, Romeo, wherefore art thou Romeo? She doesn't think he's there. Now it turns out he is, but she doesn't think he's there. So she is using apostrophe by addressing someone who's not here. You've probably done this where, someone who wasn't there, either, like irritated you through a text and you kind of yelled at them even though they're not there, something like that. That's apostrophe. So that's another figure of speech. We have hyperbole, which is overstatement or exaggeration. I was quaking from head to foot and could have hung my hat on my eyes. They stuck out so far. Clearly, his eyes did not stick out that far. We have paradox, a statement which initially appears to be self-contradictory, but then on closer inspection turns out to be true. I can resist anything but temptation, by Oscar Wilde. And oxymorons, where two contradictory words are used together, but the meaning is clear. I am a deeply superficial person. Deeply and superficial are contradictory words, and yet he's getting his meaning across. It's the same thing when we say jumbo shrimp. Jumbo and shrimp are contradictory words, and yet we know what we mean by those. So these figures of speech help the poet get his meaning across quickly, in a few words, since poetry is very distilled down, and still makes it interesting and creates those images for you to see in your mind.